This program was made possible by a grant from S.R. Foxley, Bob Generic, and Q, and by the generous support of viewers like you. If you wish to join them in pledging to this channel, please find a link to the Prophet of Zod Patreon below. You ever notice how modern evangelical Protestants think they just have the best religion in the whole wide world? Well, of course you have. And of course they think that because everybody thinks their religion is the best, right? It's kind of like your kid or your junk. You could have the absolutely nastiest, ugliest, most useless one that's ever existed, but you'll always think it's the coolest one ever, just because it's yours. So yeah, no great surprise there. But I want to zero in on a big reason why this branch of Christianity thinks it's just so awesomely unique. It's kind of set apart from other religions, to some extent in its own mind and to some in reality, by its rejection of ritual, legalism, and all the other dry procedural stuff that makes religion seem obsolete. It's a paradigm shift summed up by the nauseating phrase, "It's not a religion, it's a relationship with God." But while those words make us want to barf every time we hear them, there does seem to be something nice, even profound, at the core of this idea. And that is that instead of expecting you to do stuff, especially pointless ritual like counting rosary beads or pointing a carpet at Mecca, it says all you have to do is accept Jesus into your heart and have a relationship with Him. God offers salvation as a free gift, so if you'll but accept it, you'll join Him in heaven forever. It's as simple as that. And of course it would be, because what's the point of a works-based religion when God wants you in His presence if only you'll join Him? So Christians dump all religion's baggage, strip the ritual script from their prayers, and say, just approach God like He's your dad. This feels warm and fuzzy because it mimics the best of our relationships and connectedness with other people. But the fact is, it's really not that great, especially when presented to children, and I would argue that if anything, works-based religion is a kinder and far better option. To get into why, and to show how mimicking human relationships turns Christianity into a stressful cluster, let's look at a few things that we might take for granted about our relationships and communication with other people. First, the mechanics of how you start and maintain at least a basic relationship with another person are pretty straightforward. You can see the person you wish to talk to, and generally, at least in familiar situations with people you know, you can figure out when and how it's appropriate to approach them in conversation. Once you start speaking, there's no question you're talking to them. You know how to direct yourself toward them through positioning, enunciation, and eye contact, and verbal and nonverbal assurances from them make it clear that they recognize and are responding to what you said. There's no question in your mind that you and another person are speaking, and from there, you'll usually experience natural human emotional reactions, starting on a basic level and growing with familiarity, that come from making conversational connections with other humans and being in their presence. And over time, this gives you a sense that you have various forms of relationship with different people. If a relationship ever does start to slip away or become strained, you'll see clear signs of it and be able to follow up for assurances of what's happening one way or the other. And of course, failing to maintain a relationship with another human won't, send you to hell. Now, it's important to understand that, while this set of skills is relatively simple, it still must be learned through repeated early childhood interactions. It's far more instinctive for some children and adults than others, and for some, such as those who are on the spectrum or just slightly socially awkward, it can be harder to grasp the nuance of social interaction and relational connectedness. If I can be real for a moment, I've struggled with this greatly over the course of my life. And while I've gotten more comfortable in my skin over time, I can present very comfortably in front of 100 people, yet still feel lost and anxious trying to navigate the basics of a meet and greet afterward. That's the way it is for a lot of people. And this is in human conversations, with beings we can see and from whom we get concrete cues to help us navigate our interactions, be assured that the other person connects with us on some level, and get a sense of what kind of relationship is developing. So if kids still need to learn these social skills in real settings with tangible feedback, and if doing so can be awkward, even traumatically so for some of them, let's take a moment to appreciate what Christians are asking their children to do. By telling them to establish a relationship with God, they're expecting them to conjure an idea of the being they need to interact with in their own heads. Of course, this is guided by instruction from the Bible and from adults in their lives, but still the task is on them to distill these stories and abstractions into the idea of a personality, one they must generate and hold in their minds while convincing themselves to feel that it's a real thing that's actually with them. Then they need to start having a relationship with it. But how does a person do this? Well, usually you talk to that person. Great. But how do you talk to a being you're picturing in your head who, while ostensibly everywhere, still has a presence that comes and goes and gets stronger and weaker and must be conjured? And how do you really feel that you're properly directing your conversation to this being? Modern Christians often just speak into the air, or maybe whisper or think their thoughts to God because, He can read your mind and all that. So I guess that teaching can more or less assure you that He'll technically hear the words you're uttering. But still, this idea runs against all your intuition of how you interact with someone else. And training yourself to talk while you're just sitting by yourself without feeling like it's just weird, and to be legitimately convinced that this is a meaningful exercise actually directed towards someone, is a big thing to ask of a kid. And that's before we even approach the hard stuff. How do you hear God talking back? How do you get any feeling of reassurance that He's there with you, hears you, and that there is any form of back and forth communication happening? And how can you feel this feedback so convincingly and so tangibly that it actually becomes an emotional reality for you, and that you thus have the vital relationship with God? This is incredibly challenging even for adults, so imagine how cruelly inaccessible it is for children. All the relational cues and assurances you would pick up from another human must somehow be conjured in your mind, which is why prayer and worship are important to Christians. Prayer puts you into a meditative state in which you can relax, say reassuring words, and try to generate some kind of euphoric feeling that you can interpret as another presence within your mind. If you're good at this, and a little lucky, you can hear thoughts inside your own head that you start to think aren't your own, thus getting at least the impression of some actual conversation. And worship, of course, is just a crass, obviously manipulative exercise in using strategically chosen and performed music sets to stir emotions. So think of what's involved in reliably conjuring feelings using these experiences. Then think of the complex internal thought process needed to reshape these emotions into what you feel naturally when you interact with another person, and to trick yourself into feeling like they are feedback from an imaginary character you're maintaining inside your head. Now consider the fact that this highly abstract, poorly defined task is being expected of kids, some of whom might have a difficult time fully grasping whether they've made connection with, have the approval of, and have established a relationship with a visible person. And this is presented as the most high-stakes task a child needs to accomplish, because a relationship with God is the ultimate goal of Christianity. And that sounds nice, right? Christianity has stripped away the rituals, legalism, and works-based tasks of structured religion and just made it about loving God. But it's not nice. It's horrifyingly, traumatizingly cruel. Because not only are kids admired or shamed based on how well they conjure absurdly complex, abstract thought processes, but depending on the teaching and how it's presented, their relationship with God is the basis of their salvation. So no pressure, kids, but you'll live in eternal bliss or fucking burn in hell based on how well you've gone through these mental contortions. And there's really no marker of whether or not you've succeeded, because not only is it vague, it's internal. It's between you and a non-existent being you're imagining inside your own mind. A scary, lonely place where no adult can enter to help you process the doubts, fears, and questions they set into motion for you. Sure, they can reassure you with platitudes and generalizations, but as any kid who grew up in this environment can tell you, that doesn't really put the fears to rest. It usually starts when you're introduced to a task called accepting Jesus into your heart. It's presented as a simple thing, offered by God in love. But how do you accept it? Sure, you can utter words, but it's presented as an internal thought process, a change of heart. So how do you know that you've really done it? That you really meant it? That it stuck? I struggled with these questions for years, so unable to conceptualize what accepting Jesus into my heart meant, that all I could do was hope to survive until I grew up and could go to another church and find another pastor who could help me figure it out without me getting in trouble when people in my own church discovered I wasn't Christian. And seriously, to illustrate how real this was, one night after accidentally playing outside during a volcanic ashfall, I went to bed resigned to the fact that that night I would die in my sleep and wake up burning. And even after feeling that I had figured out salvation, I remained deeply shamed by the fact that I felt very little, and often nothing other than boredom or discomfort during worship services or long periods of prayer. These were things I was told I should enjoy if I had a relationship with God. But I didn't enjoy them, because they were stupid and f***ing boring exercises that help people with different internal skill sets than me twist their minds into feeling that they were communicating with God. As late as high school, when I was really into being a Christian, I remember staring at a brass knob in chapel, letting my eyes lose focus and trying to feel that I was singing my words to God and that I was hearing or feeling something back. These are horrifying experiences. They create needless, constant anxiety in kids who want to do the right thing, to be good kids, but simply aren't the best at shaping weird concepts in their minds and feeling like they're engaged with God. I, of course, am not alone in having experienced this, and my friend Suris has offered to come by and share how this kind of religious teaching impacted him.
So when it comes to the topic of childhood experiences, I have a few, some not necessarily just pertaining to anxiety about myself, but given that I came from a school that was very much a non-denominational school, but basically practiced what we would consider Southern Baptist teachings, I basically had a crisis of faith anytime I went to another person's church, because they would always have some different variant for how you needed to be saved, and since I was taught the very fire and brimstone version of hell, if I wasn't saved in the right way, it literally meant burning in fire forever. There was even a point in time where I had this thought that I had to pray to absolve myself of all of my sins right before death, otherwise I would carry them with me even if I was saved, and be punished for them. This led to me praying every single time I did so much as utter a swear word under my breath. Not exactly a good compulsive habit, and probably one of the contributing factors to the anxiety I experience today. Speaking of not getting saved properly, any time that I had a friend of mine come to my church, one of the things that I would always hear from them is, wow, I didn't understand that I needed to do that to be saved. And so they would get saved where I was, and I would feel like I would get a lovely little crown whenever I went to heaven, but that led to a bit of a problem. What if it wasn't them that didn't understand how to be saved, and what if it was me? The Bible's incredibly vague about how this works, considering that there really isn't any mechanism for letting Jesus into your heart. This confusion would cause me to have nightmares about dying and going up to the pearly gates, and ultimately finding out that I would be doomed to hellfire. All because I didn't believe the right way, or I didn't get rid of the right number of sins before I died, or any other number of confusing doctrinal problems that I was fed. It becomes especially confusing when you consider that we're told to have a relationship with this Jesus figure, and yet unlike every other relationship that we have in reality, this figure can't speak back or communicate in any discernible way. In fact, after a while, I had taught myself to just open up my Bible to a random passage anytime I had a question, and then try to interpret whatever I put my finger on as the answer to that question. It was a bit like operating the Bible like a solo Ouija board. But when you're told you have to have a relationship with someone who doesn't talk back, and if you don't have that relationship, then you'll burn in hell, you'll do anything in your power to have that relationship, even if certain bits don't make much sense.
I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences. Some of you might still be processing them, trying to understand what you went through, and maybe it still affects you. Sadly, and this really breaks my heart, helpless young children even today are experiencing performance anxiety and even fear of torture over things they simply don't know how to do and can never know if they've done. This needs to stop. Modern, grace-based Christianity is horrifying, and it torments the minds of kids for no good reason. If you want to present your kid with ancient superstitions and tell them they might be tortured forever, then at least give them practical, tangible steps they can take to be confident it never happens. Go back to works-based religion, where a person can at least know what to do to get to heaven and feel confident that they've done it. Or better yet, give up religion altogether while you're at it. Whatever you do and however you do it, untangle and then end this cruel mind you're putting your kids through.